Hey class, Dr. Stevens here. I just thought I would make a quick video, maybe not so quick, to highlight some of the APA concerns that I have regarding some of the submissions that I've seen here. I've been making comments on your mini reviews, and so I hope you're going back and looking at those comments in the margin as I've graded those, and make note of the corrections that I've indicated that need to be made, and then implement those corrections in future work. And just keep in mind too that if you're making the same mistake several times in a document, I might not necessarily point that out every single time. I might point it out the first time I see it, and then I'm going to leave it to you to determine whether or not you've made that same mistake elsewhere. So be on top of that sort of thing, particularly as it pertains to correct citations and formatting citations for quotes particularly, and I'll get into that here in a second. But let me just talk about some of the mistakes that I've seen multiple times. You know, each one of you might not be making every one of these, but I'm seeing all of them throughout the class. So first and foremost, APA calls for, and I call for, all of your work to be submitted in Times New Roman font size 12. That's everything on the page. Your running head, page number, anything that shows up on that page should be Times New Roman font size 12, and everything is to be double spaced from the first page to the last page. Everything is to be double spaced, and double spaced only. So don't don't extend it beyond that. I expect to see a title page, and on that title page you can have just basically three lines in that title, and it's to be centered in the center, top to bottom, left to right. That would be your name, the assignment number, and Southern Utah University. That's all I need to see on those 3 lines. If you're going to include a running head, make sure that you format it correctly. Now, I'm not expecting to see one. APA calls for a running head, and if you were submitting something officially, that would be expected. I'm not going to be concerned about that, but if you are including a running head, then please make sure it's formatted correctly. And essentially how that looks is the words running head are not all caps, but the title that follows the colon after the word head, then the title is all caps. And to my knowledge, that's the only time in APA that you would use all caps, is in the running head. I'm seeing all caps in titles of works, book titles or article titles or things like that. Even if it's printed that way in the resource that you are accessing, you don't use all caps on your reference page. You don't use all caps for a title of an article or a book or anything like that. Then if you're going to include a page number throughout, just the simple page number in the upper right hand corner. You don't need to include your name in that page number or the article title in that page number, just pages 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. So I'm expecting to see a title page. Then at the beginning of the second page is the beginning of your narrative. Some of you are beginning your narrative on the title page, and that's not correct. Go to the top of a new page, begin your narrative. You can repeat the title of your work if you wish to. You don't have to, but if you wish to, you can. But if you do have that title, that is not considered a main heading, and so therefore it is not bold. It's not treated as a main heading. It's centered, and it would be capitalized as the title of your paper, but it's not bold. And then if that is followed with a main heading, such as introduction, it would be a main heading. Then the introduction is centered and it's bold. And I will leave it to you to look at the headings format in APA. I'm not going to go over those details, but I do expect to see headings throughout, main headings and then secondary headings at least, tertiary headings if necessary, but that's up to you. But headings help break up the sections and help the reader to stay more focused, makes it easier to read. Regarding references, the word references on your reference page, references is not a main heading. It's just, I don't even know what to call it, but it's not a main heading and it's not a secondary heading, so I guess you would just call it a section heading. But it's not bold. It is centered, but it's not bold. And whether you use the word references or works cited doesn't matter to me, but that is bold. That is centered at the top of the page. Probably the thing that I look the most for is citations, the correct formatting of citations. And you've been all over the place on this, so I'm hoping I can provide a little bit of clarity here. In a citation, in an in-text citation, anytime that you are referring to the author, especially the first time, but any time you refer to that author, then that author's name should be followed with a parenthetical citation of the year of the resource that you're citing. So it would be Jones, parenthesis 2019, and then on with whatever you want to say. That's just standard practice, that every time you mention the author's name, then it's followed by a citation. If you don't want to do that, then you can just be generic about it, say the author. But it still needs to be clear which author you're talking about. So it would obviously be referring the one that you had most recently cited. Now, if you're jumping back and forth between authors, then you want to avoid confusion and make sure that your reader understands which author you're referring to. So you need to be clear on that. But you list the author's last name only, not within the citation. List the last name only. You don't use initials in the citation. Now, if you're just writing their name in the text, then you can use their first and last name as you would if you were actually talking about them. Then the author's name is, if the author's surname is in the citation, then it's followed by a comma and then the year. If you are citing a quote, in all cases, if you're citing a quote, you must include a page number. And there are several different ways that you can accomplish this, and any of them could be correct. But anytime that you are citing a quote, it needs to be clear from the beginning to the end which author you're citing. It needs to include the year, and it must include the page number. And there are several options on how you can accomplish that, and I'll leave there are some examples of that in the PowerPoint in modules that demonstrate different ways of doing that. So I'll just leave that to you to learn how that's done. But the main thing about citing a quote is there are two prospects of this. One is an in-text quote, and the other then is a block quote. A block quote is required whenever a quote exceeds 40 words. If it's 40 words or if it's 39 words or less, then you can have an in-text citation of that quote or presentation of that quote. But in-text quotes and block quotes are formatted differently, and they are cited differently, and you need to be aware of the differences between those two. Almost exact opposite rules apply to each one in terms of where the punctuation goes and how the page number is listed. So I won't go into detail here, but make sure that you are aware, and that again, that PowerPoint gives that information. Let's see. Just one final thought. I mean, there are a lot of different types of resources that you could utilize, but we typically focus on periodicals and journals and that sort of thing. And so if you are citing or putting a journal on your reference page, make sure that you're formatting that reference correctly. Now, typically a journal article, the title of the article is not italicized. The first word in that article is capitalized, and none of the rest of the words in that title are capitalized unless you have a colon in the title. And then if you have a colon, then the first word following the colon is capitalized as well. But other than, proper nouns and acronyms and that sort of a thing, only those two words should be capitalized in a title of the article. I know that we are very accustomed to capitalizing every word. That's what we were taught in 9th grade English, but that, for APA styling, that is not correct. I'm not being super harsh on that, but technically speaking, only the first word of the title and then the first word following a colon would be capitalized. Then the name of the journal, you write the name of the journal the way that it's written by the publisher, and so if all of the words in the journal are capitalized, then that's fine. You go ahead and capitalize those words. But the name of the journal is written in italics on your page, written in italics, followed by a comma and then a space, and then typically you'll have a volume number. The volume number is also italicized. Following the volume number, there is not a space. You have an open parenthesis, then you have the edition number and a closing parenthesis. The parentheses and the edition number are not italicized, so it's very specific. The journal name, the volume number are italicized. The edition number is not italicized. I've posted a sample of a literature review that was actually submitted to me by a student in a previous semester. As far as I can tell, it's nearly flawless, and it's right at the top of modules. So I would encourage you to go and look at that document. That's what yours should look like. Now, that's not to say that that particular sample has an example of every possible type of resource to be listed on the reference page, but there are several different types there, including a journal, and I've made some specific notes on the journal reference to point out how it is to be done correctly. So I'm hoping that you'll just spend some time, particularly as you're beginning to write your draft and as your final submission is submitted at the end of the term, that you've paid real close attention to the comments that I've made. Go back and look at the comments I've made, implement the corrections I've suggested, be familiar with APA's requirements, even if it's not something that I have mentioned, and just try to get it as accurate as you can. And of course, if you have any questions, you can always contact me and I'll help you out as best I can. So take care.